Radical Islamists have been released, even as Beijing is now trying to mainstream Jamaat-e-Islami, with its envoy holding a meeting with the extremist organization, which is a first for a diplomat after 14 years. Add to it the race to fix the economy that's been ravaged by recent political instability, where both America and China are keen to play a major role in the hope that they remain relevant in a post-Yunus government as and when that happens. Now, take a look at this report to know about the extent of the flux that's taking place in the world's 8th most populous country. And then we come back and ask the question that is Bangladesh simply developing a new sovereign identity away from Hasina, or is it shaping into a major security challenge at India's eastern border?
Weeks after violent protests ousted former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina from power, Bangladesh is being governed by Muhammad Yunus, a Bangladeshi Nobel laureate serving as the chief advisor of the interim government since 8 August. While Yunus's appointment was hailed as the return of the people's will to Bangladeshi governance, social instability continues to remain a challenge, stemming from recent developments since Yunus took power 3 weeks ago. The release of jailed extremists from Bangladeshi prisons is a cause for alarm. The Yunus-led government has ended the detention of radical Islamist leaders under the alleged influence of the Jamaat-e-Islami group, an outfit outlawed during the Hasina era. The release of Jashimuddin Rahmani, head of the Ansarullah Bangla team, an Islamic organization implicated in the brutal murders of atheist bloggers between 2013 and 2015, has sparked concerns about judicial integrity under the new administration. The government's alleged ties to Jamaat-e-Islami have sparked debates over its commitment to progressive principles. Meanwhile, it is expected that these groups will contest elections as and when they happen. Add to this the possibility of border police responding to a large number of people crossing the porous but deadly Indo-Bangladeshi border. Deep societal divisions between supporters of the former Hasina government and present dispensation have deeply altered the social fabric of Bangladesh. Compounding this are Dhaka's economic woes. Its $55 billion garment industry has been severely impacted, with 60 factories outside Dhaka set to be closed, and 3 big brands, including Disney and Walmart, looking at other geographies for next season's clothing.
Okay, that tells you the context and the scale of what's happening in Bangladesh. And to ensure the situation remains under control, India needs to be mindful of 3 important things. First, the Yunus government, which lacks constitutional legitimacy, may not be the final arbitrator in Bangladesh. The military has been emboldened. It's heavily invested in preserving the status quo. In fact, it was the military chief who had announced Hasina's resignation, indicating his elevated status in the country's present decision-making apparatus. The second, India should keep the pressure on Yunus's interim government to hold an election and return to a democratic framework. As of now, there's no visibility on when that could happen. And the third important thing, it's easy to draw parallels with the Pakistani situation. There's a strong military, crackdown on opposition, attacks on minority Hindu community, but the distinction is the economy. As of now, Bangladesh has sought a $6.5 billion bailout due to its falling forex reserves, but India must help ensure that the Bangladeshi economy's health does not deteriorate further, or else it could go down a path that is similar to Islamabad. Shifting focus now to the first wide-angle story of the broadcast. Just 2 weeks after Prime Minister Modi met Ukrainian President Zelensky and less than 2 months after his visit to Moscow, New Delhi may play a pivotal role in ending the conflict which has been continuing since February 2020. Before we come back and talk more about how that could happen, first listen in to Russian President Putin talking about India's major role in such a scenario.
First of all, it is Chinese People's Republic, Brazil, India. I'm in contact with my partners, and I have no doubt that the leaders of these countries, and we have the relations of trust and confidence with one another, will be really interested and provide a helping hand. If there is a desire of the Ukraine to carry on with the negotiations, I can do that.
Now, there are many conditions and demands from both Russia and Ukraine, whether it's troop withdrawals, whether it's recognizing territories, it's removal of West-imposed sanctions for Russia. There's a plethora of issues, and arriving at a common ground could be painstakingly long. But the precursor to that is the starting of the very process that requires both parties to be at the negotiating table. Remember, the peace summit that took place in Switzerland in June 2024 failed because there were 92 countries that were present, but Russia was absent. But with India's backing, the peace process can now start, since New Delhi has strategic stakes on both sides. The West has feared India's sympathy with Russia will erode the efficacy of its sanctions, while Russia has urged India to maintain its independent stance. India is no more a bystander in this conflict. Prime Minister Modi, after his homily to Putin, and said that today is not an era of war, is in a position to talk peace to the Russian side. And it was his message of dialogue and diplomacy to Kiev that carried weight. Remember, twice foreign ministers of Russia and Ukraine have met in Istanbul to thrash out a possible peace deal. So it's not that mediators are not around. It's about the opportune time and the right fitment, and which it seems is now with New Delhi at its very center. All right, we've come to the top voice segment of the show. Prime Minister Modi wrapped up his two-nation tour of Singapore and Brunei, picking up from the momentum in his first term. Let's get in the first top voice on the show, Professor Kanti Bajpai, who's the Bilmer Professor of Asian Studies at the National Institute of Singapore, to talk more about the impact of India's Act East policy and India's role as far as the South China Sea is concerned. Professor Bajpai, I appreciate you speaking to me on India's sense. I want to ask you a first question, which is the evolution of India's Act East policy. How do you see that transforming since the early days of Look East?
Well, I think it's interesting that these four countries, Malaysia, Vietnam, Brunei, and now Singapore, have been at the forefront of what Mr. Modi has been doing in the last few days. Because really, in a sense, over the last 2 or 3 years, most of Mr. Modi's second term, Southeast Asia didn't feature very high. In his first term, he was here a lot. And I think he came to Singapore at least twice, if not 3 times in his first term. He went to other countries in the region. But in the second term, it's been very noticeable that Southeast Asia has not really been on his map, or even any of the other very senior ministers, although Jaishankar was here a couple of times as well. So I think this is significant because he himself is at the forefront of these visits and handshakes, and it signals, I think, a renewed interest in New Delhi in the Act East policy. So I think that's welcome because, as I said, the last 4 or 5 years, India lost interest, I think, in the region to quite a perceptible extent. And I think the region lost interest in India as well.
And do you see India being able to really counter China, position itself as a counter to China in the South China Sea?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the dragon in the room in all these meetings is China. So none of India's interlocutors here, nor India itself, will put the China factor up front because it's very uncomfortable, both for New Delhi and for these countries. But clearly, I mean, that's the largest strategic backdrop to the Act East policy, and before that, the Look East policy. So I think Malaysia probably is the friendliest to China of these countries. And Singapore, of course, is very well positioned with China. Perhaps the greatest tensions in the maritime space have been with Vietnam because they have a claim, the Chinese, over the South China Sea, which impacts Vietnam. It also impacts Malaysia, but Malaysia has been willing to swallow hard and I think not antagonize the Chinese too much. But yeah, I mean, even the Malaysians, Kuala Lumpur has its own concerns about the South China Sea. So yeah, I would say you're right that the larger backdrop, of course, you can sign any number of MOUs. Mr. Modi just signed 4 with Singapore, but MOUs usually fizzle out. And we all know, as we're part of organizations, that most MOUs are not even actionable very much. But the larger picture, strategic picture, is, of course, the military geopolitical domain. And while nobody wants to utter the word China, that's what the big backdrop inevitably is, particularly, I would say, in Singapore and Vietnam.
I know MOUs, you mentioned any number of them could be signed, but what about trade? It's the fulcrum of any bilateral partnership. Do you think that bit India is getting right in terms of India and ASEAN as a whole?
Well, if you mean by connectivity, you mean India actually helping build infrastructure such as highways and railways and ports and so on in this region, then India's record is not great. Take Myanmar, for instance, even before the virtual civil war there, which makes it impossible now to do very much. Even before that, for 20 years, India had been unable to finish various projects there and to connect up through Myanmar to the Asian highway. So, I think clearly, leaving Myanmar aside, if on the mainland Southeast Asia we can take some things to completion, then that would be quite impressive. The region has got big players here, so India must be prepared for some quite modest gains. Before China and its BRI, the Japanese for 40 years, 50 years were the kings of infrastructure development and connectivity. So India can only play a smaller role, perhaps as it signaled a few years ago with Japan. But again, I think the accent is really on delivering some successes. Do something where you can actually deliver in the short to medium term to bring back some sense that India delivers on promises and can make a difference. So that means being selective and pulling together your own domestic agencies and interagency kind of coordination to actually deliver in real time. I think over a number of things, and not just connectivity, there's been disappointment in the region about India's ability to deliver. I mentioned the RCEP, but food exports, promising something one day and then suddenly finding food shortages in India a week, 2 weeks later, and then saying we were embargoing wheat and rice exports, promising to deliver vaccines and then not quite being able to because there was a surge in India. People understand that, but at the same time, then there are questions about reliability, you see. So I think pick selectively, deliver on something, even in the connectivity domain, to make a real difference.
Indeed. Indeed. Trade connectivity could really be the hallmark of this engagement going forward. Appreciate Professor Bajpai for speaking to me on India's sense. And on that note, we slip into a very short break. We come back on the other side with the latest as far as the Indian economy is concerned. A major upgrade. What does it mean? We come back and talk more on that.
Stay informed and entertained with the new and updated NDTV News app. You can watch all our channels live, listen to podcasts, read breaking and exclusive news from around the world and more. Download the NDTV app today and get access to the best journalism and storytelling on your smartphone or tablet. The NDTV app. News that matters to you.
Landslide devastation in Kerala's Wayanad. Join NDTV's initiative. Donate for Kerala.
You have seen their blockbusters. Now meet the legends.
साहब वो गाने जो पहले होते थे 50, 60 में, अब वो नहीं होते। गानों को क्या हो गया?
For the first time in decades on a news TV network.
When you were giving blockbuster after blockbuster, when stars like Amitabh Bachchan were, being created.
You don't create Amitabh Bachchan, you discover it.
जो आइकॉनिक जोड़ी बनी सलीम जावेद की, वो डेस्टिनी नहीं है तो ये हार्ड वर्क है आप लोग दोनों की किस ये आप लोग दोनों की हार्ड वर्क है।
देखिए, हार्ड वर्क का मतलब ये नहीं है anybody who doesn't believe in destiny doesn't mean that he controls everything. I don't believe in destiny, but I don't have any delusion that I control everything.
सलीम जावेद ने जब स्क्रिप्ट लिखी, राइटर्स थे, तो उनका नाम हुआ. उसके बाद किसी राइटर का नाम क्यों नहीं?
Welcome back. You're watching India Essence with me, Gauri Dwivedi. Now, the second wide-angle story on the show, which is about Indian economy, and in recognition of the rising heft and the massive growth opportunity that the Indian economy now has, World Bank has upgraded the growth outlook for the current financial year for India to 7% at a time when the Chinese economy seems to be struggling to meet its growth forecast. In addition to that, there's been an increase in India's weightage by Morgan Stanley in its emerging markets index, which sets the stage for India's rapid rise to a $7 trillion or possibly a $10 trillion economy in the next 5 to 8 years. Take a look at this report that breaks these trends down in greater detail.
Weeks after the IMF upgraded the forecast of the Indian economy to 7%, the World Bank has followed suit. And in line with global growth expectations, Morgan Stanley's latest report gives India the largest weighting in the Emerging Markets Investable Index, effectively overtaking China. The data shows a better-than-expected outlook for the world's fastest-growing economy. The bright economic outlook, coupled with higher weightage on the index, is set to translate into more global flows into India, allaying fears that the Indian equity markets may be primed for a correction. In fact, FPIs bought shares worth $6.33 billion in 2024, on the backs of earnings growth for Indian companies, which is higher than other emerging markets by 60%. Indian equity markets are also a lucrative investment destination due to the higher return on equity, a matrix where China has halved since 2014. The World Bank upgrade has come on the back of higher public investments and a surge in household investment in the real estate sector. Meanwhile, the World Bank says India remained the fastest-growing major economy and grew at a rapid clip of 8.2% in the 2023-24 financial year. The upgrade from the earlier projection of 6.6% comes at a time when the Chinese economy is struggling and facing headwinds, mostly due to its real estate sector and its cascading impact on the Chinese banking system. The housing crisis, which has been ongoing for nearly 4 years, has now impacted household earnings and the financial sector. Adding to the worries over the health of the Chinese economy is a lower-than-expected services growth. The IMF has termed services as an underutilized growth driver for China, contributing far less than its potential. Sparking fears of a larger risk is China's factory activity, which contracted for a fourth straight month in August. The contraction indicates the world's largest economy may struggle to meet its growth target of around 5%. For New Delhi, its task is cut out. It needs to prioritize getting big-ticket investment and press the pedal on its $1 trillion manufacturing goal, which requires favorable trade pacts. As the global trade landscape gets more protectionist, India's trade policy holds the key to its growth trajectory.
All right, second top voice on the show, Raymond Vickery, who's the former Secretary of Trade and Commerce Development, speaks to me at a time when there is the first presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and postal ballots begin today. Take a look at this exclusive conversation. We have with us Mr. Raymond Vickery, former U.S. Secretary of Commerce and Trade Development, speaking exclusively to NDTV. So thank you so much for taking out the time and speaking to NDTV World.
Thank you for having me.
My first question, sir, we speak at a time when the US elections have moved to the next decisive phase. There's just about 2 months to go. Before we get into the specifics about the India-US relationship and how India views it right now, and the election also and the candidates, how do you see the election right now as it is poised, just about 2 months to go?
Well, it is a completely changed and different situation. President Joe Biden stepping back Vice President Kamala Harris stepping up has changed the equation entirely. I think that the president had done a great job bringing the economy in for a soft landing, getting infrastructure going and so forth, but the reality was that that first debate indicated that the president did have difficulties particularly engaging. That has been wiped away. Kamala Harris did a great job at the convention. Her first interview with CNN was very good. And people think now that the debate, which is coming up next Tuesday, she'll be able to hold her own against Donald Trump. And it is those kinds of perceptions which have energized the base of the Democratic Party, particularly women of color, young people, people who are interested in some changes in foreign policy, particularly in regard to Gaza. So right now we have a neck-and-neck race, but if you look at polls, and polls are not always accurate, but what they do show is trends. And whether you look at national polls, you look at battleground polls, what you see in terms of a trend is the different situation I indicated, which is moving in favor of Vice President Harris.
I know you're a Democrat and you speak from that position, but how do you see now the Democrat camp being energized after Kamala Harris coming in, after a record amount of funding she's able to generate and raise, and most importantly, what's the kind of strategy that Democrats have now in these last 7-8 weeks?
Well, it all comes down to turning out the vote, what we call Go TV, get out the vote in the United States. And you have to have the cadres at the local level who will do the knocking on doors, the making of calls, the giving of rides to the polls.
Is that system now been completely re-energized with Kamala Harris?
Oh, yes, it has been. We've got people coming into headquarters all across the United States looking for yard signs, wanting to know how they can help. Whereas before, people were saying, yeah, I will vote for the president, but maybe I've got something else that I need to do between now and November the 5th. And that's a completely different situation. Now, we have a lot of undecided voters in the United States as well. I think that's a reflection of the fact that Kamala Harris is not known well nationally. So while people might have had their minds pretty well made up when the known quantities of President Biden and Donald Trump were there, now you have somebody new, and people are saying, well, I'm undecided. I want to take a look. And that's been estimated as much as 15 to 20% of the voters, which is a huge number.
Just 2 months before the election.
2 months before the election. In my view, that requires the kind of energy we're talking about, because those undecided people are not going to decide just on who does better on that debate on Tuesday. They're going to say, what are their friends and neighbors telling them about the candidates?
Or some would say, what is the candidate themselves putting out in terms of agenda? Is that an area that you feel that as a Democrat, maybe more needs to be done in terms of crystal clear agenda that what Harris stands for?
There's no question that we have to put meat on the bones. The whole campaign of Vice President Harris has to be premised on looking forward. And that premise requires two things. It requires the kind of hope and enthusiasm, optimism about the future, but it also requires some knowledge of what that future is likely to look like. And as the campaign has gone on, there has been more meat put on the bones. It's no surprise that we haven't had the kind of detail on websites and in other places about the platform because of the change personnel involved. But if you look at the economic proposals, they are populist in nature, $6,000 credit for newborn children, getting the child tax credit back to where it was during the pandemic, a provision on housing to be able to give a $25,000 grant for the first time, capping healthcare costs, drug costs particularly. So as we go along, there is going to be more meat, but there has to be that. For example, I would say, let's take the question about fracking, on which the Vice President has changed
Her stance,
her stance on that. You have to not only say to people, I've changed my stance, you have to say why, and I expect to hear more about that as to why it fits into an agenda on fighting climate change and helping the environment.
Mr. Vickery, thank you so much for taking
Thank
out the
you for
time
having
speaking
me.
to
It's
NDTV.
always a pleasure to be with NDTV.
Completely timed out on this edition of India Sense. Thanks so much for watching.
New day, new show, a new experience.
Start your day with the news, not views,
We bring you stories that matter.
and impact your life.
News that informs and keeps you ahead. From Maximum City, Mumbai,
To the seat of power, Delhi.
NDTV brings you the best breakfast show.
Breakfast news on NDTV, 8 a.m. every day.
Hi, I'm Shreya Saran. Kerala's Wayanad area is hit by devastating landslides, resulting in loss of lives and livelihood. Kerala needs your help right now. Let's join NDTV initiative. Come, donate, let's rebuild Wayanad.
Some people say the metaverse will only be virtual. One day this lecture hall will be made of code, and driverless cars would be trapped in intersections. But even in this maze of the future, you can't wish away health. It's time to become more resilient. "10 years of Banega Swasth India, we have grown and achieved so many milestones. And now I have a plan to beat the urgency, to stop breathing with difficulty, to relieve getting choked with inactivity. Energize our government, our environment, our society, and ourselves. Everyone, everywhere, every day.
Hello and welcome. You're watching NDTV 24/7. I'm Osama Shah. The much-awaited manifesto of the BJP for the upcoming Jammu and Kashmir elections. It is finally out. What are the key takeaways? We'll get you all the details. But first, let's take a look at the headlines. BJP releases its manifesto for the upcoming Jammu and Kashmir polls. BJP's 25 promises for the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Amit Shah says that the BJP will eradicate terrorism and separatism in Jammu and Kashmir, and that the Article 370, it will never be restored. Environment Minister Bhupender Yadav exclusively speaks to NDTV on the caste census and says that our caste politics is of affirmative action and that the opposition, the Congress, is indulging in politics of polarization. Olympian wrestlers Vinesh Phogat and Bajrang Punia joined the Congress party. Consensus within the party about fielding Vinesh and Bajrang in Haryana elections. Vinesh Phogat says that when they were dragged on the roads, all the parties stood by them except for the BJP. One person has died and 5 people have been injured in a rocket attack in Manipur. Massive combing operation underway in the Moirang district. This rocket attack comes days after 2 drone attacks in Manipur. Renewable energy is at the core of India's growth, says Prahlad Joshi, while Bhupendra Yadav says that sustainable living is the key mantra for the planet at the India Sustainability Mission and NDTV campaign. Well, the big story that we are tracking at this hour, the Home Minister Amit Shah, he was in Jammu and Kashmir and he released the BJP's manifesto. Now, BJP has promised 25 promises for Jammu and Kashmir. Amit Shah there, while speaking before the launch of the manifesto, said that he will eradicate, the BJP will eradicate terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. Amit Shah there launched the BJP's manifesto, also known as the Sankalp Patra. The Union Home Minister, he also said that separatism and terrorism will be eradicated in Jammu and Kashmir. He also promised laptops for higher secondary students in remote areas. In fact, he also talked about the introduction of metro services in Jammu and Kashmir. In fact, let's listen in to what the Union Home Minister Amit Shah had to say.
10 साल जम्मू कश्मीर के मूल बासिंदों की संस्कृति को टका देने वाले ये 10 साल रहे हैं। एक जमाने में धारा 370 की परछाई में यहां पर अलगाववादियों की मांगे, हुर्रियत जैसे संगठन और हुर्रियत जैसे संगठनों के नतमस्तक होती हुई सरकारें हमने देखी थी।